Hi, welcome to Frederick's Garage, your favorite location for the eradication of oxidation on your restoration or your transportation. Today, we're covering the preparation and painting of some of the undercarriage components that are necessary to have in place in order to properly fit the replacement quarter panels, things such as the frame, the inner rocker, the floor, etc. Stay tuned. Here's a piece I made a few years ago with a simple bead roller. Here's that's the original. This piece fits inside the quarter panel. This, of course, is the outer side. The hip of the quarter panel goes here. And there you go. It's pretty close facsimile. So what we're going to do is polish this up with the fiber wheel and then get some primer and paint on it just so I can be a little closer to installing it. Here we go. You want to be careful with the direction this spins so you don't catch an edge like I just did on the end there. Glasses are steaming up though, so that presents a bit of a problem. So what I've done is hit some of the harder to reach areas, such as the inside of these ridges, with 100 grit sandpaper. And then I used this rust treatment, which is essentially phosphoric acid or metal prep. I still need to rinse that off. That's left this etched haze on there. And I'll follow up with a top coat. Actually, probably next step would be a self-etching primer, which might be overkill because I've already etched this, but no harm. And then I'll just use one of these two paints, whichever finish I like, either flat or satin, probably the satin. Nobody's going to see it unless the interior panels are off, but I imagine the satin would give a little bit better protection than simply the flat, but who knows? I have a little more of the flat, so maybe I'll end up using that. Cheers. So we've got our self-etching primer coat on here. It looks pretty good, except for the run that I hung back here near the wire, but I think that'll do. I mean, after all, this is an interior piece, right? I'm not going to scuff that. I'm just going to shoot right over it because it's still a little soft, and I think the other stuff will lay on top nicely. So I've done a pretty good job of cleaning up the frame. Here's a summary of some of the tools I used. 2 types of wire brush on a drill and a fiber wheel, or what's left of one. That was all pretty effective. These smaller brushes got into spots that I couldn't reach with bigger brushes. This buffer / grinder with a wheel on it, being primarily a buffer, this only turns about 2,300 RPM as opposed to the small angle grinder that turns at 10,000. So brush like this, and in fact any spinning tool, you need to check the implements for the maximum speed. This one has a max RPM of 8,500, so I could really only use that on this implement safely and not this one. This one was highly effective in part because of the stiffness of the brush. While this brush is thicker, more aggressive, the 10,000 RPM speed on this really sent the rust running. Any case, let's check under the car and see what kind of damage we did, or should say how much success we had. So this has gotten a lot cleaner. The fiber wheel I used on the floor a bit, the heavy wire wheel on the frame. You can see I'm even got some shiny parts there. I have another tool to try and get into these tighter areas. I'll show that in a moment. But basically, we're getting everything fairly clean. A little tough to reach in there. Haven't wiped anything off yet. I have to clean potentially with solvent and then follow up with water before I apply any type of surface on here. I do need to use a little solvent to get the last of that undercoating off of the floor. That would be up here. But you can see everything's looking fairly clean and rust-free. This just gives you an idea of the dust generated. This is the clean new inner rocker panel, and you know, there you go. So it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. As an aside, you generate a tremendous amount of dirt and dust doing such work. So to try and keep the rest of the garage from becoming a war zone, I threw some cardboard along the perimeter of the car, try and keep the dust mostly under the car. It worked with the heavier stuff. I could still see a light misting of dust throughout the garage, but I guess that's just inevitable when you're working on old junk like this. Oh, also, I always use a jack as a reinforcement. So while this is up on jack stands in the rear and wheels in the front, I have the front wheels chalked, and then before I crawl into the car, I always make sure the jack has some pressure on it as a backup. So here's potentially the secret weapon, the small needle scaler. Just picked this up, Harbor Freight, $39. These things are designed to knock the slag off of arc welds, and secondarily, they're useful for knocking heavy rust off of thick metal. So we'll see if I can't use that to get into some of those brackets on the frame and all, into those spots that I just can't reach with other means. Speaking of dirty job, here's the mask that was new when I started with this rust grinding process, brushing, grinding process. And there you go. Quite a mess. Other tools that were extremely useful were the die grinders. I have the straight one and the angle one. They handle these brushes and even the fiber wheel, so they're great for getting into tight spots. Something the drill can't always do. Cheers. So here's what things look like after using the needle scaler. You can see I was able to get into the pocket of this body mount fairly well. I was able to get around the bolt on there into the tight leaf spring bracket. One thing to note, if you are looking to have nicely finished metal, the needle scaler does leave some scars as evidence there. Heavy frame like this doesn't really matter, at least I don't care. Sandblasting, I think, would also leave some scars, but anyway, you can see how we were able to get into this body mount area as well. Up in here where the body bracket goes up under the frame. So all things, this flange here on the body bracket, all capable or cleaner as a result of the needle scaler. Up here I still need to take off a little bit of the excess undercoating, but we're getting much closer to the next step, which would be cleaning and refinishing. You can see back here I did the rear part of the frame when I did the trunk pan about 2 years ago. Now you can see a little bit of the new trunk pan right there. And it seems to have held up well. Granted, the car is indoors, but we did take a similar process, obviously not needle scaler, but the heavy wire brushes and the like. Because the trunk floor was out of the car, I was able to get to all aspects of the frame back there, back in the day. So here inside the car, I used the needle scaler on the top of the frame, and on the top of the body bracket, you can see the sort of pinprick scarring it left on the metal, but the metal is fairly heavily pitted anyway. And also it's going to be hidden when I weld up the floor, so that's not of concern. Even here inside the body bracket, I was able to get that mostly clean. So I would give the needle scaler a thumbs up for use in specific jobs like this. One thing I don't think I can overstate is just how dirty and messy a job this is. For example, there's an example of the red dust that was a result of this process. I mentioned before that the mask got filled up with dust. Well, I was just using a dust mask, and my nose picked up a whole lot of other finer dust that the mask, these cheaper, more coarse dust masks just don't seem to get. They seem to be great for body filler and the like, but this red wire brush dust is just, or rust dust for lack of a better term, is just insidious. So I understand that an N95 mask is a much finer filter, and that might have suited me better. Secondly, this dust, other dust, you can just kind of sweep it away with your hand or a cloth. This stuff was just insidious. It stuck to everything. I couldn't get on the floor under the car without coming back totally filthy. So I ended up making a purchase here and got a heavy duty mop and bucket and mopped most of the garage floor around where I'm going to be working, because really that was the only way to get it reasonably clean. The car itself, I just used a damp cloth to get the dust off of the worst areas. It's still here, of course, and on the dash and the like. That's less of a concern because I will be generating more filth. Of course, I need to clean the frame, essentially wash the frame before I treat it or paint it, and I'll cover that in a moment. Excuse the pun. Here's another example of the insidious rust dust. Vacuuming wouldn't work, sweeping wouldn't work. The only effective way to get a clean or even semi-clean surface was by wiping it off or washing it off, just so you know. I'm going to use the same material to paint the frame as I used on the back of the frame when I cleaned it and had it exposed doing the trunk floor pan. This stuff dried pretty hard. The hammered finish kind of hid the pits that were in the formerly rusty frame, and it didn't require a whole lot of prep work other than, wire brushing everything really good and washing and cleaning it. The instructions talk about using soap and water to clean it up. I'm not going to use any phosphoric acid or etch the metal. I think this paint works well if there's a little bit of rust for it to adhere to. I think I'd rather have it adhered to mild rust than trying to turn it black with phosphoric acid and then possibly have some rust underneath. So I think that's what I did before, and I'll try that again. So we'll see how we make out. So let's have a look at how our painting turned out. Here's the upper frame from inside the floor, obviously. And let's take a quick look underneath the car. Fairly respectable. I did hit the body mounts with this paint. I'll probably follow through and do those in black, but in any case, I wanted to phosphate coat or etch the floors and do those in black, and I may actually go over this color on the body mounts with the same black as on the floors. But they did have a fairly robust coating of rust on them, so I thought the Rust-Oleum would be the best to get to stick to them. Anyway, nice hard, somewhat thick finish. Can't really disguise the severe pitting on this piece, but we work with what we have. Maybe a few years down the road, if I live long enough, I'll put an Art Morrison chassis under this thing if the rest of it's ready. Cheers. So I'm going to shoot a little self-etching primer on the body bracket and on the section here that I welded and finished. A couple of cheats. I try and reuse things as much as possible. Why buy masking paper when you can still get newspaper, those little freebies that they have at certain stores? Secondly, the plastic. We got some bedding recently, and I saved the plastic that it was wrapped in, and I used this to keep the dust off the softer parts of the interior of the car. The car is mostly a roach, but if I can keep the dust and metal fibers down from the grinding and sanding, all the better. Anyway, let's see how we make out with this spray bomb. So here we unmasked. As they say, a coat of paint hides a multitude of sins. Didn't paint back here yet because we are going to be doing some plug welds for the inner rocker, so that's just going to melt. So we'll revisit this shortly. Here's the body bracket, all nice and dry, ready to install at any time once we're fitted up and welded in the inner rocker. I'm going to get the outer floor ready to paint. To do that, I'm going to knock a little more of the rust off. I need to use wire brushes on these die grinders so I can actually get in there a little tighter. Of course, the wire brush has limited RPM range, so I've turned the air compressor down accordingly, but this should allow me to get in there and get the last little rusty sections before I treat it, prime it, and paint it. Here we go. So here's the Naval Jelly I spoke of. It's this pink gel, and I use that because I'm applying it to an upside down surface. Anything more aqueous would simply run off. So there you have it. Let me get my brush and dab it on there, see how we make it out. Give it a little bit of time to cook. So I've applied it in a few key spots. Basically, you need to rinse it off or wipe it off with a wet rag. So I've only put it in places that I can reach with the wet rag. You can see that in the case of bare metal there, it's etched the metal, much like a metal prep would. And you can also see that it's raising the rust. Hopefully, till I wipe it off, that'll be black, black deactivated rust, iron phosphate. So let's let it work a couple more minutes. It's about 55, 56 degrees in here, so everything's a little bit cool, but it seems like it's warm enough to keep working. So we've got a coat of paint on the floor on top of the self-etching primer. And everything's looking pretty good. This body mount has some sort of paint or plated coating on it, maybe powder coated, some sort of silver or clear. Anyway, I scuffed it up with a Scotch-Brite, and then where I had done some work where it was bare metal, where I worked through the coating, I've hit it with the self-etching primer. So then we'll just give it a coat of black enamel, and then this piece here, which is the inner part of this, we had previously treated that with evapor rust, and of course it's pitted, but mostly clean, paint ready. That too will get sprayed with self-etching primer. General rule, anything that's bare metal should be etched either with phosphoric acid or self-etching primer. Here we go. So here we have the inner portion of the body bracket, just coated in black enamel, gloss black. Trying to use the last of a can I have. Here's the body mount inside and outside. Probably I'll use a satin finish on this when I paint it under the car after it's installed. Need to paint over where I welded in, try and keep everything with a nice coat of enamel on it so it's a little less prone to rust. Anyway, we're getting there. Cheers. I started painting the inner rocker outside because of the volume of paint. I didn't want to have too many fumes to deal with while I kept working. And of course, not long after I started, it started raining, so I had to bring it in. In any case, the finish is a little spotty. The can was running low and I was fighting the weather. So there's the inner rocker as it stands, or sits, as the case may be. I'll have to give it another coat, but this is the inside. While we're talking about that, here's what's left of the passenger side inner rocker. This is the inside of that panel. And let me walk over here. What it looks like to me, you can see some shiny metal there. It looks like they coated it with a light cavity wax, which gave some protection, because obviously it's still shiny here and it is coated with something. but wasn't enough protection given the salty winters and the tendency to collect moisture inside the hollow panels. Interesting though to see that they did have some foresight for rust prevention beyond the dealer applied undercoating. So here we have everything painted and mocked up. There's the rear number 4 body mount. We've got nice paint in here. The inner rocker is just held in with screws at this time, supporting vice grip as well. There's the body mount number 3 that we fixed recently. There's body mount number 2 that still needs to be welded in, and body mount number 1 that we fixed recently. So that's what the painted undercarriage looks like before I start welding everything up.